After months of being pushed back in the Kursk area, the Ukrainian armed forces launched a counterattack into Russian forces in the northern part of that salient on 5 January. So yesterday morning in the local time here. This caught many by surprise. Especially in the West, you've had a number of headlines that are pointing out that the Ukrainian forces launched new Kursk offensive. The build one there's, again, man, just looking at that headline, it makes it sound like this must be some huge operation here that caught the Russians by surprise. Many are wondering if this is something similar to what happened in 2022 when the Ukrainian armed forces caught the Russians by surprise in the Kharkiv area, to where they had massed a bunch of forces unbeknownst to the Russians, launched off into this and ended up putting the Russians to flight, sending them back, eventually taking somewhere around 5,000 and 6,000 square kilometers of territory. So hopefully for the Ukraine side, from their perspective, that's what they were trying to accomplish. But when we start looking into the details of what is actually going on, we'll find that it's not quite on that scale. And actually, according to many published reports, it wasn't even completely surprised. Apparently, many in the region knew about it and were prepared for it. There were, however, some things about this operation that did take the Russians for sure by surprise, but we'll see what happens as a result of that. In fact, here was when asked about it, Andrei Yermak, one of the presidential advisors for Zelensky, initially just said, "This is certainly good news for us. Russia is getting what it deserves." So now you would expect with that there must be some painful operation for the Ukraine side that they must be driving in. But as the Russian military review has reported some of the details of what's happening, they're accurately reporting so far as we can see. They say, according to data from military volunteer Roman Alekin, the armed forces of Ukraine are trying to attack from the Suja area towards Bolshoi Soldatsky using a large amount of equipment. We'll see, large is a relative term. Ours are actively working with artillery. Aviation has joined the work. FABs, I'm actually not sure UMPK, quite frankly, are taking out Ukrainian tanks. The enemy uses electronic warfare systems, so we have a certain problem with drones. But nevertheless, our Ukrainian armored vehicles are being burned, or ours are burning Ukrainian armored vehicles. Sorry about that translation there. That's actually originally in the Russian. Now, interestingly enough, you recall that we've actually, for about the last 3 or 4 weeks, been saying that there had been reports on many of both the Russian and Ukrainian military bloggers that there may be an offensive coming. Actually, it's more than 3 weeks. Early December, late November, there was some claim that the Ukrainian side would have some side of it. At the time, we thought it might be a Christmas offensive, something to get the attention of the West, something to get the attention of President Donald Trump, President-elect Trump. But that didn't happen at the time. So I actually assumed, well, they probably decided not to do that because it wouldn't make any sense if they did. But now we see that, in fact, they have. But let's take a look at the scope of this. And, Gary, if you could put this map up here, let me just kind of orient you to what's going on. So the areas in the red on the left and right of the screen there, and in the yellow, represent areas that Russia has either recently taken back or has previously taken back. That whole outside area that's kind of got a red dotted line around it represents the entirety of the Russian territory that the Ukraine side gained when it invaded in last August. August the 6th is when that started. And since that time, it's being methodically squeezed down until there's roughly 50% of it, 40%, depending on how you calculate it. The Russians have taken it back here in another slow but methodical squeeze down. So what the Russians have done, you'll see there's 3 green circles there. The one in the upper right corner in the northeast portion of the map, Bolshoi Soldatskoye. Sorry about my Russian pronunciation there. This is where the offensive is taking place. And what we've been able to assess so far is that the Ukrainian armed forces have made new use of an electronic warfare system. This appears to be some new capability that they had, and perhaps they're trying to test it out to see if it's working. And initially, so far, according to a lot of the Russian military bloggers that I've seen, has been successful, perhaps more so than anything else has been in recent times. There were actually a number of drones, normal first-person view drones, FPV drones, suicide drones, so-called, that were moving towards the Ukrainian armored vehicles. And then when they got 20, 30 feet away, all of a sudden the signal was blocked and they could no longer hit. So at least as of today, so after 48 hours, apparently none of the Russian FPV drones have been working, which is quite an accomplishment, frankly, because there have been electronic warfare going on both sides throughout this war. And there's always this constant process of progress and then countermeasures and then new countermeasures, et cetera. So it's a constant ongoing thing, happens in every war. With technology, certainly has been doing so a lot on this. And after all this time, for the Ukraine side to come up with something that apparently knocked down all of the first FPV drones for the Russians is really noteworthy, because the way a lot of this works is you don't just have all your drones on one frequency. You have them on a number of different bands and different ranges, so that if one frequency group or one range of bands is being jammed, then you can bring in another drone in a different one, so that jamming won't work on this one, etc. So some work, some don't. They have to constantly change. Well, now apparently, at least in this portion of the attack, what's being reported is that so far all of them have been knocked out. So we'll definitely want to wait and see how that happens. However, you can't get too excited about that if you're on the Ukraine side, because what's left is what isn't being blocked and what is still working for the Russian side. There were when the blogger there said there was a large operation for the Ukraine side. Large is relative, and in this case, apparently it was 20 total tanks, number of personnel carriers for the Ukraine side. That's actually about a company sized, and that's not big at all. It's actually quite small in terms of an operation in the Kursk area, in the entire area. So you've had probably multiple brigades in there, and a brigade is typically made up of 2 to 3 battalions, and a battalion is made up of 2 to 3 companies. So this is a company size. So it's 2 down from a brigade. So if that gives you kind of context of the size that we're talking about here. It had important tactical operations. And in fact, according to that map, there have been some advances by the Ukraine side. They did move forward. And according to the Ukraine side, they inflicted significant losses on the Russian side. We don't have any detailed numbers yet, but it appears that in fact is relatively accurate. It's always impossible. You can't get true numbers, because one side always exaggerates their losses. The other side always minimizes their friendly losses. So you never can tell for sure exactly what the losses were, but there were definitely losses because the Ukraine side did make a penetration and get up in there further on. But then the Russians stopped and then blunted the attack. And as of today, after the initial incursion, they're trying to get more people up in there. The Ukraine side is, but the Russian side is also blocking. So far, they have been using Ka-52 attack helicopters, which we haven't seen in the front lines in quite some time, but they brought those in to stop that. You've also seen lots of artillery, FAB bombs, helicopters, of course, the mortars. Also fiber optic drones. So while the electronic warfare has stopped the Russian standard FPV drones, it has done nothing for the wire guided drones, which both sides are now employing as well. And those are simply impervious to electronic warfare because they don't rely on any signals. They actually have an almost hair width wire that can unspool and can go many kilometers. Actually, this technology has been around quite a while on missiles. The TOW missile that the U.S. uses is one of the operations there, where you have to actually put the reticle on the target, and then you'll fire that thing, and then the spool unwinds, and as you move the reticle around, the missile will also follow. That same technology has now been applied to drones, and both sides are using it. And so far on this one, the Russians, who don't seem to have that in large numbers, have it in some numbers, and it has been effective because they have published those videos on here now. But let's get into the purpose. What is Ukraine trying to accomplish with this? Now, the most obvious thing so far, or the most evident anyway, is that the Ukraine side wants to say, hey, we're still here, especially now we're less than 3 weeks out from the Trump administration coming into office. And they want to say, hey, we're still fighting. We're still working hard. You've seen some of the people talking about that already. And look, this is probably one of those that's like so many that the Ukraine side has done, especially this year. It's for media impressions. They want to give the impression that they're still viable, that they're still a fighting force, and so they will hype up all this stuff. And Yermak's comment there is evidence of that. They got what they come, as though something really big happened. But look, it's a company-size element. It moved up a little bit in one part of this front, but it hasn't gone very far, and it's unlikely that it's going to go much further. They just don't have the combat power to do so, because Russia still has, even though they have the electronic warfare advantage that's been going here, that's only one of 8 or 9 different weapon systems that the Russians can bring to bear, because that didn't even talk about, artillery, tank fire, infantry fighting vehicles, infantrymen fighting at all. I mean, all those things are still there for the Russians. They still have more manpower than the Ukraine does. They definitely have more artillery rounds. They have air power. They have air defense, etc. All those things are still in the Russian favor. So it's just nearly impossible for this to have any kind of consequential advancements. It's going to change even the tactical outlay, even in one portion of that entire salient. But that's not going to stop the Ukraine side from trying to fan this up. And let's actually see what is going to, how is this being viewed? So if this was a for media opportunity to try to make things look good, you have to say they've had some success. That original headline from Build I put in there. Gary, if you could throw that first headline back up again, because I want to point something out it's very interesting. You can see that, Ukraine launches surprise offensive in Kursk. And then the second one there, if you could put that one also back up, Ukraine forces launch new Kursk offensive, possible second axis. You see, so those are big terms. And an offensive, that brings to mind something like 2023. When the Ukraine had launched, scores of thousands, tens of thousands of troops, and thousands of tanks, artillery, personnel carriers on a broad front, etc. That's what an offensive is. This is a local counterattack in military parlance. It's a very small organization. It's a very narrow band of purpose, and it has a very limited military capacity. Even if it's wildly successful on its own strength, it can only go so far. And as we're going to see, it doesn't have much of an impact even on the battle for the Kursk salient itself. But that doesn't stop the West from really hyping it up. Here's how CNN and their military expert characterized this.
Ukraine is right now launching a counterattack against Russian forces in the border region of Kursk, while one top Ukrainian official says Russia is getting, quote, what it deserves. Ukraine first moved in on the Russian territory in a surprise incursion in August, managing to hold much of the area despite Russian efforts aided by North Korea to drive forces back over the border. Joining us now to discuss, Cedric Layton, retired U.S. Air Force colonel and CNN military analyst.
When it comes to what's happening in Kursk, the Russians have not dislodged the Ukrainians from there. And in fact, as you noted, the Ukrainians are engaging in a counteroffensive, which is basically aimed at cleaning out some of the Russian areas and the North Korean areas around the area of Sucha, which is the town that they occupy in that district in Russia, right across the border from them. Now, it's not going to change the course of the war by itself. It's also not going to change exactly, what the Russian goals are, but it could have a momentum of its own. And actions like this, if the Russians were in fact, and the North Koreans were in fact in a situation where they lost that many people, that could have a significant impact on their ability to carry forth operations in the Kursk area.
So he's claiming there, and he's trying to hype up that this is to clean, the purpose of this is to clean out the Russians in the northern part of that salient in there. What does that even mean in military terms, to clean out? They're not going to clean out anything. Again, don't miss this. A company-size element so far. Maybe they're going to bring some more in later, but it's a very small number because they don't have big numbers. They don't have this large armored fist that they can bring in with, 1 or 2 brigades. If they brought in a couple of brigades and like had, 2 axes and they started punching through it and found a place where the Russian counter forces were weak and they smashed them and then they were able to drive up much further. Okay, that would be something that was at least tactically meaningful. But this so far is just like a demonstration. So they're not going to clean out anything. And then the second thing he says is, well, this is to, perhaps get some momentum. And it's odd because he acknowledges that this is not going to change the war. It's not going to do anything in the war, but he says that it could create some momentum for the Ukraine side up in this area. And he said, and if the casualty rates, which were claimed by the Ukraine side of over 1,000, they claimed that they killed 1,000 Russians in this one daring operation, which I find that very hard to believe. I don't have any first-person knowledge on it, but just militarily speaking, it's nearly impossible for Ukraine to cause that much damage with those few troops, or that the Russians would and or the North Koreans, if that's true at all. That's still very much up in the air. I've seen little conclusive proof that there actually are a lot of North Koreans fighting up in that area. But what Russia has shown and how they're fighting this entire war for at least the last 18 months, and really going back even beyond that, is that they don't mass numbers. They sparse themselves out. They spread themselves out so that you don't have like one FPV drone taking out 20 guys, for example. They spread them out and make them come in much more diversified and dispersed areas, so that if somebody gets killed, it's one, and then there's not anybody else. Then they continue to move in forward. They do infiltration tactics, etc. That's what they've been doing fairly effectively. So I find that that claim of 1,000 just not credible at all. But then, even let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it was true. Okay, let's say that they took out 1,000 in there, and what? Because now already the Russians continue to have dominance in the air, and that includes rotary winged aircraft as well as airstrike capabilities. Their artillery still remains outguns them. The drones that they also have, then the if not the FPV drones, then the wire guided drones, etc., mortars, tanks, all those kind of things. They're still all in the Russian favor. So what do you think you're going to gain by having this operation to go through to create, quote, momentum? And it's just not going to happen, folks. That militarily, this is going to be another blip on the screen. The Russians will then, whatever casualties they've taken, they'll replace those. They'll continue to move forces, and whatever Ukraine has done with this electronic warfare in relatively short period of time, based on the last 3 years of operations, the Russians will find some way to counteract that. They'll retool the electronics on there, or they'll put into mass production, perhaps these wire-guided drones, and that they'll be able to do. So bottom line is the balance of power is still not shifted. There's no momentum to get. All this is done. When you go in the offense, you're going to have more casualties. If you're in the defensive position, you have overhead cover, you have things to hide behind, et cetera. It's a lot harder to get. But when you move out of those positions and you move on to the offensive, then obviously you give away the benefits of the defense, and you're going to suffer higher friendly casualties. So far, no one in the West is talking about how many casualties the Ukraine side has suffered. The Russians are claiming that they have destroyed most or all of those 20 armored vehicles. Ukraine perhaps is coming in with some more. We'll have to see how that goes. As of this morning, there hasn't been any notice of any additional incursions beyond that line where they had gained after the first 24 hours. But a different way that the West is characterizing this is, well, you know what? It's all about leverage. It's all about negotiations, because Donald Trump is coming in soon, as Deutsche Welle says.
So now Ukraine has this unique opportunity to make this last push to demonstrate that it's still willing to fight, and that it's capable of taking at least a small sliver of territory, which doesn't have any strategic meaning from a military perspective, but a political significance.
That's another one of those things that it just cringe when I hear that. This analyst for Deutsche Welle acknowledges that there is no military significance to this territory. So Ukraine is moving in this direction where they have moved up this road to a small village, which apparently they did take on the first day, and it gains them nothing militarily. But because she wants it to mean something, because the West wants it to mean something, she just declares that it has political leverage, that somehow when Donald Trump comes into office and he starts negotiating with President Putin, that somehow Trump would be able to leverage that into something negative for the Russian side. And I just got to think, listen, that's spin in its purest form. But you see, serious analysts actually think that can work. You have Colonel Layton there at CNN. You have this expert here at Deutsche Welle. And it's not going to. Folks, look, spin only works on the minds of people in TV land. Okay? Some of the people who are watching those reports may believe it. Okay, fair enough if they do. Fair enough if they don't. But what matters is what happens on the ground. Ukrainians are going to suffer more casualties. It's just how military, it's just how war works. If you go on the offensive. So whatever they've done, however much they've gained right now, they're going to pay a higher cost for that than had they stayed in their defensive positions. You may say, but they can't stay in their defensive positions because they'll just continue to keep getting shrunk down. As that map I showed you demonstrated graphically that they have been getting shrunk down since August, since about the 10th or 12th of August when they got their high water mark. Ever since that time, it's been slowly, methodically shrinking down. That is true. But by going on the offensive, all you do is die faster because Russia has all the manpower that they need. They have all the ammunition that they need. They're not going to run out of any of that. Further, what none of those people are talking about is what's happening elsewhere in theater. But it's not just, by the way, it's not just the media. It's also our current governing officials.
In Kursk, what we've been doing every single day is to try to make sure that Ukraine has in hand what it needs to effectively defend itself against the ongoing Russian aggression. Their position in Kursk is an important one because certainly it's something that would factor in to any negotiation that may come about in the coming year.
Okay. That's just more nonsense from one of the worst secretaries of state we've ever had because of how disconnected from reality he is. He lives in Spinlandia. I mean, you might as well say he's the Secretary of State of Spinlandia because I think that's where he thinks he lives, is in that country, that state of mind that's detached from what the real ground is, because he says it's really important. It is not important. It is I won't replay it, but in that map that it was used on the CNN section there, and Gary, if you even want to play that in your browser without sound, that would be cool. Because you see they had this whole image of the entire front line, and you have to look really hard to see this tiny little blip of the Kursk salient in the overall map of the war. It's that small. And so for the Secretary of State to say that this matters and that somehow that the Russians are going to say, darn it, I guess if we're going to get that territory back, we're going to have to make a deal with Trump. And I guess I'm going to have to give up something over here in order to get my land back. I mean, that is like an elementary student who's looking at a map and saying, gosh, I like these guys better. They're cool. I want them to win. So we'll just declare that this is going to give leverage so the big bullies won't get what they want. That may be fine from the Ukraine perspective desire, from the Western desire, but there's no reality to it. You're not going to take anything back in there. Russia is not going to negotiate that away to negotiate something else away to get that back because they can take it back. You've seen that they've been, Gary, put that first map back up there again, if you would, please. You can see from this is all the territory that the Russians have recovered so far. And they're continuing to squeeze down. And even if it took another 2 or 3 months, there's just very little left that the Ukraine side can do. And as it turns out, that even what's happened so far, even with this operation here, what none of these people in the West talked about was that the operations to take this territory back by the Russians continues on, as Military Summary showed us this morning.
According to the report of the group of forces north, the Russians managed to take under control more than half of the settlement of Makhnovka. Some sources reported that the village of Dmitrikov and the village of Makhnovka, villages of Dmitrikov and Makhnovka, were captured by the Russians completely. And also we have different updates from different mappers showing us some improvements on the ground. So once again, while the Ukrainians are trying to attack FPV drones. Once again, according to the Group of Forces North, the settlement of Leonidovo was captured by the Russians completely. As for the southern outskirts, the Russians also managed to improve their positions, and also, according to the report of the Group of Forces North, the Russians managed to take under control more than half of the settlement of Makhnovka. Some sources reported that the village of Dmitrikov and the village of Makhnovka, villages of Dmitrikov and Makhnovka, were captured by the Russians completely. And also we have different updates from different mappers showing us some improvements on the ground. So once again, while the Ukrainians are trying to attack the settlement of Большое Soldatskoye, the Russians are attacking the city of Sudzha itself, and the Russians are trying to take under control the village of Malaya Loknya.
Why did you not hear that from Deutsche Welle? Why did you not hear that from CNN? They didn't even mention that on the same day that the Ukraine side launched this offensive, i.e. a company-sized attack into the north, a counterattack, the Russians continued their onslaught and took yet more territory on the neck of this incursion. So it literally doesn't even matter what happens on that northern part. Everything matters on that neck, because if the Russians are able to continue to chew up, and this is exactly what I do, because it's how you can accomplish the most with the least effort, is that you'll basically move these two axes together until you literally cut off everything. Then you don't even have to fight to take all this stuff in the north. It'll just die on the vine because you no longer can get ammunition, food, medical support, reemplacements, none of that stuff. They'll literally just shrivel and die. So the Russians appear to be putting the effort to do exactly that so that they'll cut it off. And that's one thing the Russians have been showing, is that they take the path of least resistance on their offensives that cost them the least amount of troops, though that still is a substantial number, but that they will go slow to preserve their number of troops, even if it takes a lot longer, because it's clear that Russia believes, and Russia is correct, the time is on their side. They have the manpower, they have the ammunition, they have the defense industrial base, they have the air power, they have the air defense, that they can just continue to slowly chew this thing apart until finally it just all dies. Now, in light of that, why would Putin say, even though I've got a plan on and I have had all this success, that I'm going to suddenly stop on January 20th because Donald Trump comes into power, and that something magic about Donald Trump is going to change the reality, the military reality on the ground in the Russia-Ukraine war? I mean, that's as crazy as it sounds, but there are some who believe that. And despite everything I've just shown you, here is the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, I believe it was this morning, talking about how he's undeterred by any of the realities I just told you and is continuing to fight forward.
І це незмінне завдання посилювати нашу ППО. Зараз вже готуємось до зустрічі в Рамштайні. На цей тиждень запланована зустріч. Десятки країн-партнерів, і серед них є ті, хто може збільшити нашу спроможність не тільки у захисті від ракет, але й у захисті від керованих бомб, від російської авіації. Будемо про це з ними говорити, будемо переконувати. Головком доповів також по ситуації в Курській області. Зокрема, в боях сьогодні та вчора в районі тільки одного села Махновка на Курщині російська армія втратила до батальйону піхоти північно-корейських солдатів і російських десантників. І це відчутно.
So he's telling everybody, look, we're going to meet in Ramstein again. You may recall that the Ramstein meeting is where the so-called 50 nations of the West all come together every month in Ramstein, Germany. They meet with the Ukraine side. They tell them what support they can give them that's new for this particular month. They've literally been doing it throughout the war. And so he's still thinking at this late hour, despite everything that's been happening there, that there's going to be some kind of new package come in, even though everybody's gotten everything off the table before the Biden administration goes out. European Union and all the NATO countries they've given big packages recently. There's just not a lot more to give. So I don't know for sure what he's expecting. He'll probably get a handful of additional interceptor missiles for his air defense. Might get a few things. You may recall we've shown you over the last 3 or 4 weeks, especially prior to Christmas, he was literally begging everyone for 12 additional Patriot air defense systems, none of which were produced. And there's a reason why. Nobody has them. Nobody wants to give up that precious material because the Patriot systems do have some decent success against certain incoming categories of drones and other missiles, especially cruise missiles. They're not perfect, but they are capable. And he would like to have that. Nobody gave it anything. Funny how nobody wants to talk about that in the Western media, that he didn't get any of the things that he desires, which, according to all the analysts, is crucial to be able to continue fighting. But they're not. He's not doing that. And now that he's trying to tell everybody that this is a tangible result in the Kursk with this new counterattack that he's done there. But it's not. I mean, I've just shown you as clear as can be in military terms how it's a blip on the screen, and that's all it's going to be. If it's not already stopped, it will be probably within days, and then they'll be back again on the defensive because Russia has not stopped to go on the offensive elsewhere. This didn't cause them to reposition forces. It didn't cause them to stop here and go back up there, which even that wouldn't have been it would be a net of no change because either the Russians are attacking here or they're attacking there. But now, as it turned out, they're attacking all those places at the same time because they have the force structure to do it. They have the ammunition to do it, etc. Now, this interesting thing, I'll just point it here. I think around 1 o'clock this afternoon, we're going to have Colonel Doug McGregor on. You may have seen Lex Fridman, a discussion that he had with Zelensky, which was just published last night. A 3-hour conversation he had on a number of topics. I think it was extremely illuminating. Doug's going to be able to weigh in on some of those things there. But one of the things you're going to see in that interview, which was mirrored in this comment here, is a complete detachment from military reality. Just like it's one thing that you can excuse Deutsche Welle or CNN or CBS or any of these other networks, New York Times, Washington Post. You can a little bit give them some understanding of, well, you're going to put what you want on there because there's no cost to them. There's no cost to CNN or to the United States to keep going with the fiction. There is a cost, though. If you're the leader of Ukraine, there is a tangible, physical, bloody cost to your people and your territory by detaching from reality and going down a path that is not only unsustainable, but can never succeed. Doug is going to help point some of that stuff out today. But in the last part of this show here, I want to point out something else that nobody in any of these reports in the West have talked about, and I mean none of them. And that is that while you're having this additional foray in the Kursk area up in the north, in the east, where the existential fight is going on, also continues to move on for the Russian side. So there have been, and just kind of for your understanding here, all these areas that are kind of like with a white background in a gray area or a red background in a red circle. This is areas that the Russians continue to move forward on. So this means that they've moved into another area, but it's still contested. These white areas and the red areas means that they is no longer contested, and the Russians have seized full control over that. And you see they continue to methodically move further in the Pokrovsk area. In the Karakova area, a new territory has been gained. Additionally, they're moving up even north of that to try and cut off again these Ukrainian soldiers in this area. A new large area, and these fields are moving forward here. In the Velika Novoselka area here, you see they continue to move methodically forward, and they're almost surrounded this new village here, and just on and on all the way down the line. Everywhere you see Malotachmachka, they're moving forward in those areas too. Just anywhere you want to look on this line, all the way to the edge here in the Kherson directed area. Everything. The Russians continue to move forward. None of this stuff is stopping for the Ukraine side. There's no offensives anywhere. Everywhere along the front, they're at best holding on, and at worst being driven back. So when you talk about what is going to help and what is going to be useful, then you have to be able to figure out, where are we going? Where can we go? Where is spending troops and people's lives going to matter? What is it going to change? How is any of this going to work toward the Ukraine side? That is one of the things that Zelensky will be putting out his vision at 1 o'clock. I strongly recommend you watch this. If you haven't seen the interview, it's quite a long one. So we've kind of parsed it out of some of what I think is the most important issues that you can see that. And I give Lex full props on this. It is one of the best interviews I've seen. He is very much pro-Ukraine. He's very much pro-Zelensky. But even more so, he's pro-peace. He wants to bring this to peace. And he tries many times to say, hey, how can we find common ground here? He said, I want to see I want to see Putin, and I want to see Trump in the same room. He said, sitting down and talk this out until we can get the war over with. So I wholeheartedly give my endorsement to what he's trying to do there. But what you'll see in these excerpts that we're going to show you, Zelensky is just not there mentally to be able to acknowledge the reality, to move to an area to where peace becomes possible, or even the end of the war for that matter. Maybe peace is not even in the realm of possibility at this time, but ending the war is. Peace will have to take probably decades. I mean, let's just be honest. To actually get peace is going to take decades of sustained effort, but you can't even start that until you first bring the war to an end. And that's what we'll be talking about this afternoon with Doug McGregor. So appreciate you guys watching us today. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't already done that. Really appreciate that. Also, to make sure you're aware that we are on podcast, because I know sometimes people are traveling. They don't have an opportunity to watch a video, but they can listen to it on podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, really anywhere you get your podcast. Just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive and you'll find us waiting for you there. In the meantime, we really appreciate you watching. Appreciate your time. I truly do. Look forward to seeing you at 1 o'clock this afternoon with Doug McGregor.